My name is Ed Karlsen. I've been playing with these things for over 50 years. It was kind of started out to be a hobby, and I think all through the years it was more hobby than a business. And anyway, we had an awful lot of fun. I've always found it's easier to win than to lose. you know, but the losers have never figured that one out. But this is one of my winners, but it was a complete flop the first time we run it. And I built the whole boat, but the crew put the shaft in and all the equipment, and I didn't check it. And I told Bernie I'll go with the boat to the first few races, make sure everything's correct. And he said, well, we don't need you. So after he blew up half of his motors, he called me up and said, now we need you. So I flew to Detroit, and this boat was an exact copy of the Bardo I built the previous year, and I couldn't find anything different. And it was funny, I was working with a guy there from Detroit, forget his name right now. Anyway, we checked, both boats were sitting next to each other for the whole week, and we checked both boats and everything was the same. And finally we were walking down to the pits to go out for dinner, and he looked back, he says, well, look at the carburetors. I said, what do you mean look at the carburetors? He says, come on, we went back there. Well, the carburetor on this boat was 2 inches higher off the front deck than the Bardo. And see, most inboarders don't know that this is nothing but a big outboard. And the shaft angle is much more important than the sponsons, or it's the most important thing there. And I found it was 2 inches higher, and from there to the propeller, that's only half a degree. And when they would run it, it would be plowing so hard on the sponsons that the motors would go to a real high load on them. The manifold pressure was getting up to 125 pounds or something. Anyway, and the motor just would blow up. So anyway, we checked it, and I told Bernie, I says, well, the boats are identical except for the shaft angle compared to the Bardo. And I says, you're not paying me to be here. If you don't want to listen, I'm going to go on home. So anyway, he said, what do you want to do? I said, well, Howie and I will take the boat up to Les Stoddicker's shop in Bay City, Michigan, and we'll change it, tell the whole crew to go home and build motors, and we'll meet you in Pasco. Well, we changed it, and Pasco took second. Then it won 3 national champions. And the crew still thinks it was something different. Yeah. And they shimmed the sponsons, they're still shimmed just the way the crew went. And which is very surprising because Billy Shoemaker was scared the Bardo was going to blow over backwards. And this sponsons are I think they're 1.25 inches deeper than the Bardo. And he kept being afraid of it, but when they both ran together at Detroit, when they finally I fixed it the following year, they ran side by side, and Billy never pushed it that hard. He said we were doing 165 down the chute, so he thought he was going to blow over. Well, it looked fine to me. And they were side by side, and finally in the last lap, the motor blew up on this one, so Billy won it.
What did you do to fix it?
Well, we basically lowered the motor 2 inches, then used the shaft angle, and had to change everything all the way back to the strut. And actually the strut's in the same place, but we shimmed it real. We probably wouldn't need to do that if they would just loosen up the bearings. And the shaft log, everything, we had to change the motor mounts and drop the motor at the front in. It's just a big long land. So you had a big long shaft and you dropped it, 2 inches. And that's what we did at that end, and lifted the same at the other end. This museum has been a fantastic success because of Dave Williams. He's one of my adopted sons, and he worked with me for quite a few years. And he was building a hydroplane with my son before he was killed in a hydroplane. And he always wanted to have his hydroplane of his own. Now I tell him, you got 20 of your own, and you can run them anytime you want to. So it really turned out good. And
So why is it important to protect?
well, the boats have a lot of history around Seattle. In some places in the country they don't know even what a hydroplane is, but in Seattle it's part of our history. Until we got professional sports, all we ever had in Seattle was hydroplane racing, which started with there was boat outboard racing here and inboard limited racing, and just only the people who were involved with it knew about it. And the unlimiteds until the Slow-Mo 4 went back east and beat the people in Detroit. We finally had something in Seattle besides the Huskies football team, and it was the 50s and the mid 60s. It was a big thing in Seattle for Seattle, and now we got all kinds of things to do in Seattle, so it's not as great, but it is a great history. It was part of Seattle. It'd be almost you could figure they built airplanes out of wood at Boeing when they first started, and they're building these things out of wood when we first were doing it, and now they're using a lot of composite. I'd rather build them out of wood. The composite is very, very expensive, and I don't think it's that great. And a wooden boat, you can check it and find out what's going on, happening, and doing it. And in fact, the one I built different than this was both the Notre Dame and the Parco. And the reason I did that, I didn't put any plywood on the bottom or the sides. I just put the battens down and aluminum right on, which we saved probably 300 pounds, 400 pounds of weight there. And in fact, the Notre Dame was about 1,000 pounds lighter than this thing. And the Parco was the same. So I narrowed I always got a kick out of it. People said whether my shop was too narrow. So I had to make the boat narrower. No, I decided to make it 2 inches narrower because it was so much lighter than these, which, this one and the Bardo were very successful. The others could have been, but they either had crew problems or money problems. So it takes a lot of money to operate one of these things. And boat racing, even down to the smallest classes, is not really cheap. Well, every boat's got its own history. And if I can tell you on some of them, which they were doing, and Dave could tell you on every one of them. We got all kinds of things in here. Most people don't know we have an outboard that it's gone 180 miles an hour. We were hoping to get 200, but too many problems, and they did too many things wrong. But we could have went 200 with an outboard, very easy. Oh yeah, I worked with Mercury on propellers. And they came out with, they wanted to go to a whole line of inboard propellers. In fact, OMC was going to the 3-blade propellers for their tunnel hulls. In fact, I got one from a friend of mine in Florida, and a casting from OMC. I said, where can I get another one of these? Get one. He said, well, take that one. So I brought it home and worked on it myself and put it on a boat called the Calypso. Well, it really worked out real good, but it needs some more work. So I told him, I said, well, take it to guys that most did. We had a guy in Tacoma who was a good prop man. So then we put it on the Calypso again, and Chip Hanover won the nationals with it. And In fact, then when we went down there and worked with Mercury, they at St. was it St. Pete in Florida, and they brought a bunch of propellers down, and then especially for the 7 liters, which were beautiful, but they were a little too thin, so they would last about 2 laps before the blades would. And they kept saying we hit the bottom of the lake. So I says, no, we didn't hit it. It's real shallow there. It's only about 5 feet deep. So I had the driver go out real slow and go to the first turn and gently get on the back chute. I said, gently put the throttle forward. And you could see about halfway down the straightaway, you could see when the propeller was starting to bend, the whole rooster tail.
You can see it?
Yeah, you can see it right in the rooster tail. Anyway, I sat down with the Mercury guys, and they want to know what size propellers to use on every class and what they should be using. And then they put it all back in the computer, and they've come out with some awful good propellers. But see, they were all just castings. And castings won't stand up on these. In fact, when I changed the Miller, I ordered 2 casting propellers from Mercury. Then I had my prop guy do it. And the Miller hadn't won a race all year with all the new changes I did, and from putting rear sponsons on it to changing the gear ratios and changing the props to great big propellers that are more. You slow the props down, and they become more efficient. And so we've put and with a cavitating strut, we could run a lot of bigger propellers than anybody else because we could get on. Most boats are restricted with the size of the prop because they can't get on a plane. Yeah. Well, with the cavitating strut, it cavitates the propeller, so the motor gets into the power range, and if the propeller finally bites, you think it was shot out of a gun. Yes. So we could, that first race, we finally got the boat that we changed. Anyway, on the Miller, we changed that and the gear ratio, and they hadn't won a race all year, and the propellers were just castings. So we lucked out. They cracked one race, and they won it. And we went to San Diego, and I told Chip, well, don't qualify real fast. We want to scare Budweiser out. So he goes out and breaks the qualifying record, I think 152 or way up there. And I said, what did you do that for? He says, by the tachometer, that was supposed to be 142 or 3. He says, the only thing I noticed, I come off the corner, it was time to turn again. Well, he was going through the corners a lot faster, and he was up to speed real quick. And so it was time to turn. So we won that race easy when the Budweiser blew over backwards. And so we didn't get a chance to run against them. But then we went to the next race was Las Vegas, and Crawford jumped the gun by 7 seconds, which, it's Bernie Sports, so you can do that. And there's no big deal because the Chip just blew by him on the back chute like he wasn't even there. So they dominated that that was the end of the year, but all next year. And the one with your rear sponsons makes the boat much more stable in rough water. So the driver can can drive it real hard in rough water. So after they all got beat in the second year by the Miller, the Budweiser crew, asked to explain these rear sponsons to them. I said, well, I'll come by and put them on for you. And they said, oh, hell, the whole crew quit. I didn't know they told me. I didn't know they disliked me so much. So I says, nothing to it. Just make them 3 to 6 inches wide, make them 2/3 the distance of your strut, and put a 1 degree angle of attack on them and go for it. Now they're all running them. And the funny thing I get a kick out of is these rudder mounts I got on all of them. That's the silliest thing I've ever seen.
All those big welded rods.
Yeah, all they're doing is got a great big leverage point to tear it off the boat. Why don't you just move the transom back? because you're not gaining anything. I remember talking to them, like, oh yeah, it works. I said, well, it works. It works. If you move the transfer back, it'll work too. But all they do is they really got to beef it up because they've got a great big crowbar now to rip it out of the back of the boat. And I thought, well, that's ridiculous. But and it costs a lot of money.
In itself.
Yeah, that was a great, Ole was an old carpenter. That's how he started when he, I guess, when his younger years. And he stood around there for about a week and watching me and everything. And I finally just told him, so Ole, his coveralls was hanging there saying Ole on him. I said, well, put your coveralls on and help me. Well, he never had so much fun. And his daughter Evelyn said, man, that's the best thing you've ever done for me. You kept him out of the office for 3 months. And everybody used to tell me that Ole was so difficult to get along with. And hell, he's a great guy. And they build these boats with aircraft things in mind, which is kind of silly. And like, just all the bolts that hold the battens to the frames. These guys are using aircraft boats. Well, that's fine, but after you run them for a year or so, the battens loosen up. You can't tighten them up because you already buried them to run out of threads. So I thought, I said, well, we can get the same things for 1/10 of the price and have some threads on it. So if you want to keep, if a boat has been, 3, 4, or 5 years old, you can at least tighten the battens back up instead of tearing them all off and putting in more stuff. And he said, yeah, that's a good idea, And like when I built the X side, Ted Jones insisted we use all birch plywood. Well, aircraft birch plywood. I said, well, it's expensive as hell, and it's not that great. And he said, but the reason I knew that, a guy who used to be around was he worked at, what the hell was his name? He worked at U.S. Plywood, and he also was his sister was married to Chuck Hickling, and so he was crewing the Miss Seattle with Chuck Hickling driving. And we could get all the plywood we wanted from U.S. Plywood. Anyway, the best product is fir. And we get 3/4 inch marine fir, and man, it's tougher than hell. But, and I asked him, I said, how come U.S. Plywood doesn't build marine plywood out of birch? He says they would if they could use it, but he says it's too hard a product and it doesn't meet the glue standards. So if they were using the the standards they had for how they run that from different nationwide, they can't use birch. It's great for kitchen doors. When guys use it on airplanes, I don't know why.
Just lightweight, I think.
Yeah, and fir, it's just like the stuff now we use on kumi. Well, kumi's balsa wood. It's great on J hydros, but it's not good on unlimited. But I remember it was changing the sponsons for what's the guy? What's his name? Harvey. Yeah, he says, he had that boat there when I changed his boat over from Merlin to a turbine. Well, he got a problem there because his boat was built with a lot more lift in it and everything, and he was carrying 400 pounds of lead. And he had these sponsons every time you turn around, they were breaking them and everything, and I did a bunch of work on him. Just changed the boat over, put the rear sponsons on, and did and got it all set up for him. But I said, well, we should change the sponsons. You know, you put, so I says, I'll put you a pair of sponsons on, it'll last forever. And he says, well, can you get some hokumi? I said, no hokumi, we're going to get fir plywood right out of U.S. plywood here in Ballard. And I said, well, we're going to laminate it. I said, we don't have to, I said, you're carrying 400 pounds of lead, let's put some sponsons on that are going to last a while, and that way you won't have to replace them every year. So which we did, and they were great. And we still had to carry, I think, 150 pounds of lead because it didn't meet the standards, but at least but the sponsons were great.
Yeah.
But anyway, the wood and product stuff, and the composite, I don't like composite. I had another friend who knew about Georgia Pacific, and he told me, he says, I think I can get all the plywood for you for free. I said, how are we going to work that? He said, well, Georgia Pacific knows, knows that Bardo is a national, worldwide business, and they wanted to get in on the showing their wood. So they sent a guy up from Portland or someplace in Oregon, and he came in there and asked me what I wanted. He says, I said, can I have anything I want? He says, yeah, the New York offices give him what he wants. So I says, well, I want 5 ply fir in vertical grain, you know, instead of rolled. And I needed 4 sheets 30 feet long, and so then maybe a dozen 10-footers. Well, they built me that stuff. It was gorgeous.
30-foot sheet of plywood?
Well, there's scarfed. Anyway, well, the funny part about when the boat got destroyed, we were building on the Hallmark homes. We were trying to build one in 2 weeks. Well, we just had, build a new hull, and then we just took all the hardware off. So the guys went out to, to get the tanks out of it. They took some sledgehammers out there and they started pounding on the deck, and the sledgehammer just bounced back. I said, oh yeah, take a skill saw, cut it. But it was a terrific product. In fact, I called a guy about 2 years later. I asked him if I could buy some more of that. He said, you couldn't afford it. I said, what do you mean? He says, we shut a whole mill down in Oregon and selected all the logs we had in order to cut them. And to make this plywood, it probably cost you $100 a foot. And I said, oh, okay, I can't afford that. But that was an ideal product for it, but you can't. But just for itself, and even my outboards, I would always, if I could, get the fur for the cockpit sides. That's the best product because it'll give without breaking. And the Kumi, if it's got a crack in it, it's cracked clean through. I mean, it's a great product for something or for light boats, but for inboards, it won't last very long. Before Ron Jones decided to call them pickle forks, they were called forklifts. They look a lot more like a forklift than they do a pickle fork. So I was going to say, everybody thinks of Ron Jones. Well, he gave it the name pickle fork. I'd never seen a pickle fork with only 2 forks on it. But a forklift. In fact, the first forklift hydroplane I saw was probably an outboard from a guy from Florida called Swift Hydros, and he built them and sent them all over the country. And he had one come out here, a test model. It was called a something 100, but it was a forklift hydro. And a friend of mine used to race in the sleigh race with it. And he won and beat everybody up to, we used to go all the way up to Lake Sammamish. And anyway, he'd come out of the slough and the snow was going wide open with the thing, and he stuffed it. Well, the waves were about like that because of a windy day. He comes out of the slough nice and calm, and all of a sudden he's at the north end of it'd be the yeah, north end of the lake with the wind coming from the south, so it was really rough up there, and he stuffed the thing. And so no one was too excited about it. But the swift hydros, we always stuffed them. I remember we went to, what was it, Electric City. And as soon as noon shows up in eastern Washington, the wind blows. We used to run 16 in the heat. Well, we stuffed 9 dehydros, all swift hydros, including 2 of mine. And I watched Hugh Introff go run them over with a cab over, right through that stuff wasn't even there. So the first boat inboard I built was called the Hilton Hyperloop, and it was a round nosed boat though, but it was a cab over, and I think the fourth owner still got it sitting someplace down in Tacoma, but it was unbeatable. I mean, no one thought it was exciting because it didn't do nothing. It just left everybody. It didn't fly around or do anything.
Total efficiency.
Yeah, and I got interested more when I saw another boat. The De Silva brothers had a forklift hydro at a nationals, like in California, in about '58. Anyway, I saw that thing running in the 250cc hydro. He won the whole race, just ran away from all. And none of the outboards they built, the guys didn't do that. And when my son was driving a hydro, I built the first pickle 40K hydro for around here, or forklift. But that's what I would have built. But everybody, most of the guys wanted to sit in the rear. Everybody that I built boats for all wanted to sit in the rear. In fact, this one came out 400 or 500 pounds heavier than the Bardo. But it was equipment to crew, because it's both identical hulls, but the equipment they put in it. Well, like George put a half-inch aluminum, or half-inch or 3/8-inch aluminum floorboard in it. I said, George, what are you putting all that in there for? Oh, it's easier to hook up the throttle. And they had a valve in the right sponson for draining the oil. It must have weighed 50 pounds, this great big valve. I said, that's ridiculous.
So seemingly identical boats and...
Yeah, and it's then between 500 pounds more, because it's basically the same materials. I didn't have the fur, but it had all the rest of it was just a fur from U.S. plywood. These boats, my boats were different though. The one thing compared to the boat I was copying, the construction's totally different. The frames run all the way through. All those other boats, they didn't do that. And all of Jones's boats had the frames, the sponsons were put on afterwards. Then,
Center section.
yeah, but I run them all the way through. Yeah, and
Same thing on the X63X side?
yeah. Everything I built was what we run it all the way through. And it's well, when I built this one, somebody went and called Bernie or some deal and said that Karlsen was using a bunch of scrap wood on the boat. I thought it was Dave Heronsberg, but I asked him here a couple of years ago, and he said it wasn't him. Yeah. Anyway, so Bernie called up. We were building down at Boyne Field when Budweiser was there. And Bernie called me up. He said, "Well, we got to put a halt on the boat." Oh hell, there were three or four Lear jets sitting out there on the runway. These guys all coming in there. Well, his partner was with the guy from Southwest Airlines. And he wouldn't know the difference from looking at it if it was a tugboat or anything. They're all nice guys. But the only one that really knew something about it was Volpe. He came up in the Harris Lear, and the guy from named Bernie's partner. Bernie's had one there. Anyway, they were looking at the wood. I said, well, they says, what's all that wood doing there? I said, well, that's just holding the frames from moving until we're finished the boat. No, that's just scrap. I bolted these frames are all the way across. And if you lay it down someplace, or you don't do that, it'll move. It'll move. Just in the nighttime when you go shut down, or you take the tension stringers and lay them on this concrete floor with only one side, with it's still wood, and come back in the morning, they'll be a foot off the ground on each end. That's what I found on the X side. We built it, come back in the morning, the damn thing's a big rocker, just from the moisture in the floor. And so you take these things and you want to build them put every frame together with the top part too, so that it won't move.
Yeah, so it's basically jigged.
Yeah, the boat's its own jig. And so when you get here, you don't run the frames, so you put them in with you, but then you run a scrap piece across there. And it's just like the X side, I had to build it in 59 days. And because Ted Jones said, well, the only reason the boat, they stuffed it, and the only reason is Karlsen stapled the whole thing together. I did. All the frames I laid on the bench and I stapled them together, and then that way with all the glue and everything, we used weldwood glue, which is better than the glue that's in the plywood, and we stapled it together, and then I go and screw it together, and then we bolt those from every corner, but the staples were like a clamp, and I did that on the deck. We're in a hurry, so we fitted the deck, and we glued it all up, and I stapled it down. That way, then we would drill the holes in for the screws. We didn't have to take it off to get the sawdust out. Then we just start screwing it down. In fact, I had a piece that was, with the X side, I had about a 4-foot piece out of the center, and the Stone Brothers owned it. They said, I think Milo saw it all along that, Ted Jones is supposed to know what he's doing. And I took it up and showed it to him. I said, sure, look at the staples. And the whole thing was about a 4-foot piece. But all the glue joints were fine. The screws were in there. I said, the staples were just to hold it until so we could drill it and then put it, it's simple, I do it today. But using staples itself for a boat is silly.
It was just a process they were unfamiliar with, or just...
Yeah, like we built the little ones down here, but the guys are using all staple guns. Well, staple guns are fine, but when you're doing the frames, but it'd be like they would shoot the staples and the batten would go away from it, and I was looking, hell, they had an 1/8-inch gap in there. I said, well, what are you guys doing? I says, you got to, if you're going to do that, you get a bucking bar behind it.
You got to back it up.
You got to back up and hold pressure because you only got one too. When I used to put up, on the outboards, well, not that one, but that one that's hanging from the wall. Well, I used these little bronze nails, and I used a ball peen hammer, and I would put them about 1 inch apart, 3/4, and I'd make sure that I wanted to see glue running out of the seam. And but if these guys were all doing these little, then I finally, well, they're in a hurry, they don't understand, I try to tell them. And they're, banging them out there. And then they go back and fill the seam up with some more glue with sawdust in it. But it's simple. It'd be like, building an airplane with rivets and no bucker on the other side, or a bridge. And nails are the same thing on these things. And it's you can see the screws on this neckline. You get the light on it.
Sure.
And it's just sitting here. Now this thing was rebuilt. It got banged up on the last time it ran or something.
And you did the repair job when they stuffed it?
No, I think Stouter did it back east. Because it spent 20 years at Indianapolis.
Oh, I mean, when it stuffed at Tri-Cities?
Oh, yeah, I fixed it. But since then it had quite more damage that was redone just as a display boat.
Did you and Stodiker get along okay? Was there ever any friction there?
He's the finest boat builder and guy I have ever met in my life. And his son is just like him.
Cool.
I wish I could have spent a year working with him. A fabulous guy. Everyone was so simple and easy, nothing to it. And I became good friends.
That's good.
In fact, he gave me some advice I didn't do, and I was sitting with him at Detroit, I think the following year, in the bleachers. Yeah, but it had the Notre Dame. Anyway, the Notre Dame crew was hollering for me to come down to the boat. And Les turned to me and said, "You know, Ed," he says, don't involve yourself with the crew. Don't be too friendly, because the owners then will just think you're a crew member too." And I says, "Well, they need my help." He says, anyway, that's the best advice he ever gave me. And I didn't do it, and he was absolutely right.
So it changed after that?
Oh, hell yeah, I never invited any of the parties. I just said, rather, me and McKernan are in the same boat. I mean, I went to the jockey club out there where we towed us to Tampa. I was with the boat, and George was a good friend. Well, Bernie's, has the boat there sitting, and all his buddies there at the jockey club, and bragging about it and everything. And he gives George his credit card and says, "I'll take the whole crew to dinner." So after his buddies were left and everything, he says, "Well, give me back my credit card." That's my opinion of Bernie Little. And it happened that I was out of favor, and my boats were too cheap. And I built this boat complete with paint job for $15,000. I built the Bardol, the unpainted, for $5,000. And Dave Cully said they built that boat over there for $300,000, and Bernie loved it.
Yeah.
And the crew did most of the work. Yeah. I said, I should have charged so damn much money that they loved to pay it. I didn't know that because I knew Bernie was a cheapskate. Like he asked me how I liked my room one time in Detroit. I said, "Yeah, Bernie, it's a real nice room, but I hate every damn morning that gal keeps knocking on the door and wanting the brooms." So that didn't make any points with Bernie. Then one time I walked in with a six-pack of beer. And he went by, Bernie was there, and he grabs that and throws it in the garbage can. He said, "What the hell are you doing drinking that kind of beer?" I said, "Well, the wages you pay me," I said, "I can't afford that Budweiser." So I wasn't helping matters. So he says, "Get all the Budweiser you want." I said, "Oh, we want one or two," but anyway, I was out of favor for all kinds of reasons.
So did he approach you pretty much mid-season when the Bardol was having their success with?
Yeah, he caught me
bombshell.
In Kelowna. He said, "I want one of those." I should have said, "Well, $100,000.
Yeah. No.
But I was too young and stupid. Well, I wouldn't think they'd pay that anyway. Everybody thinks, all of my customers think it's my hobby. I said, "Well, you can probably say it is." But tell people I built the Bardol for $5,000. Well, it was $68,000. I bought my house for $12,000 too, though. All these Collins were they had molds for them. And the only difference, in fact, I built the boat and fiberglass the whole deck, and they had the cowlings. Now this here was one that they made. Dave Smith was on the crew, and so he did a whole cowlings, and that's what was a. They used to have a mold. All the boats had the same mold, and so we never made a cover for it.
There was never any intention to run a cowl over the
No, it's
motor.
just what for.
Yeah.
You know, it's just something to throw around the pitch. And it's in the way. And so, and then they built it. Billy Shoemaker said that here we couldn't turn the boat because the tail was too big, and if you feel it, you know. And Billy, I've known Billy since he's a kid,
Sure.
and I mean he's only about 12 years older than I am. Anyway, so I bought this cowling from them and put it on here. That was off the Bardo.
Okay.
And they have one with a hole through it
Right.
because Billy couldn't turn the boat.
So that's why they had the headrest like they did, to open up
Yeah,
the tail?
open it up like that. And Dave Smith made that one too. And so I got that for a cheap price. And it worked out good.
So pretty much the same mold for the Notre Dame, and then
Yeah, all
and
the same
for
thing.
Parcos.
Yeah. And because I forget who in the hell had the mold for that.
Oh, did you design and make those though?
No, I never made them.
Okay.
I had either bought them from somebody or on the Notre Dame. I think they had it. They had a bunch of parts off of they kept breaking their boats and throwing them away. And let's see. And I got the Parco from somebody. Certain stuff like that was a lot of different ones around.
So with these two boats, kind of the class of the field, the Bardall and the Budweiser now, and then you were approached by Shirley McDonald.
No, they've actually been approached. Let's see who. I don't really remember. Let's see. I think it was the crew wanted it, and because everything, you know, these two boats were winning and everything, and so they wanted it, and so I don't think I ever did anything with Shirley. I did through the crew chief. They had two different crews at that time, the old timers and all they did is fight back and forth. And then I met Shirley and became a good friend of hers. I liked her. She was quite a gal. And she was a poor girl, never had a dime on her, but she was awful cheap when you take her out. All she wanted was a shot of scotch and a hot dog.
Cheap days, huh?
So, but anyway, I really thought a lot of her. And you know, she had a drunk for a crew chief. You might as well keep him drunk, because you're better off. And they had a bunch. Everybody. It was she had. I explained she had 15 crew chiefs and no Indians. And in fact, her brother wanted to buy a boat for me, and at San Diego race. In fact, I would drive from Seattle all the way down to just go take my time to take my wife and my brother. We spent a whole week coming down the coast. Well, I stopped in Malibu just because I'd seen him at the race and he wanted to buy a boat. And so we did, and then I picked him up at the airport the last 3 days when the race was in San Diego. And then Shirley got a hold of him, and he saw the same thing I saw. You know, we never finished the heat because somebody did something wrong. You know, they hooked the water up to the oil line, or you know, and the blowers were so much clearance on them that Leif he couldn't even go anywhere without the nitrous, and so he always ran out of nitrous. You could tell it because he quit on the last lap, and then and everybody's in. He's still out there cranking, and pretty soon the lights off, and a big black smoke, and because when they run out of nitrous, the carburetor, anyway, it floods the carburetor or the engine out. And so we broke every qualifying record with the Notre Dame on all the courses. We were the fastest qualifier and never won a race. Shirley asked me afterwards, she says, well, first her brother said she wanted not to buy a boat, wouldn't race against her, he wanted to go in with her. And he said, well, if I do, I'll fire your whole crew, and the driver too. And so he says, no, she couldn't do that. So he says, forget it. He went back to his harness races. He had horses and harness races. Anyway, so she finally asked me after we lost she told him at San Diego, if they win the Gold Cup for her, that she would to leave the boat there and take everybody to Hawaii for 2 weeks. And anyway, they didn't have something always. They were out front a couple times, but something always happened, and then they never finished the heat. So they didn't have enough points to get in the final heat. So anyway, she asked me, how in the hell can I win a boat race? I said, Shirley, you want to know the truth? She says, yeah. I says, well, first of all, fire the whole crew, and including the driver. And I says, send the priest back to Notre Dame. He had a lot of fun to drink with, though. I says, and finally, some guy like George McKernan that can cuss out anybody he wants to and knows what the hell he's doing. And I says, and then we'll take the clover leaf off the tail and put a swastika on it. And I says, you won't win the sportsmanship award anymore, but you might win a few boat races.